Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 69 in the series. It is the final episode of 2019, so we're gonna say bye-bye to 2019 and welcome to 2020. I also have some button band info, some beautiful bags, and a little bit of an FO. And a giveaway, a huge giveaway, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. I am coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, where I'm a professor at the university there, and as those of you who are returning viewers, hi everybody! As those of you who are returning viewers know, I'm a professor there, so the semester is just over, and I'm kind of having a little downtime before I rev up for the spring. I have a grad seminar on science, technology, and speculative fiction coming up, so I'm pretty excited about that, but I have to do some prep work for it. Otherwise, we're kind of hanging out. We enjoyed the holidays. We celebrated both Hanukkah and Christmas, and we're looking forward to the new year, so happy holidays to all of you and happy new year in advance. And welcome to anybody who's new. This is a podcast about knitting mostly, and lots of garment modification, DIY, design type stuff. A little bit of spinning thrown in there. I finally got my spinning wheels back from my office after the move, which was 6 months ago. So I have all my spinning wheels together in one place at last. And what else do I tell you? I tell you where you can find me. You can find me as Knitting the Stash just about everywhere. Obviously here on YouTube, over on Ravelry, on Instagram, and the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. And that's where I post all the show notes for every episode. So if you ever have a question about a pattern I'm talking about, or a technique, or something like that, or a video, or a link, they're always over on the blog, and you can check them out there. Let's see. I usually tell you what I'm wearing if I'm wearing anything woolly. It's been about 60 degrees, 50 something, 60 something this weekend, so a little bit warmer. But I'm still sporting my East Nook hoodie, which is by Kristen Orme, and I modified it a little bit. I talk about this back in an earlier episode. It's a great little hoodie with lots and lots of texture all over it, and it has a little pocket in the front. It's a great pattern, really well written, and it came out in one of the knitting magazines back in maybe 2014 or so, and I just love it, and I knit it up, and now I'm wearing it because it's a good sweater. So let's see, today I've got a finished object, kind of. I've got info on our finishing up our KAL for Knits in Translation. I've got some technical stuff about button bands that I want to talk about, and I have a huge giveaway from Lorna Landcaster, so that's what we're going to get to in the end. Let me show you my finished object first. Now I will say I've been doing a test knit for Albina of LB Hand Knits all week, and I've finished a cardigan, fingering weight cardigan. Yes, it's kind of amazing. I think it took 2 weeks total. I'm on the last button band. So I can't share that with you quite yet, but I have on the back burner a beautiful cowl that I've been working on as my kind of fun knitting whenever I'm at soccer games, or you know, like sitting in line or in the car or something like that. I try to have a project that's just pretty simple so that I can just work on something while I'm waiting and sitting around. So this is the Meraki Cowl by Jen Starhunter, and it is actually Jen's first pattern, and I think that's pretty cool. It is a gorgeous gradient cowl, and Jen Starhunter designed this for the 2019 kind of fall holiday collection for SweetGeogia yarns. And as some of you guys know, I'm an ambassador for SweetGeogia, and so we get a little sneak peek at the new patterns before they come out. And this pattern came out in a collection that we found out about in November. And I was like, I have to knit this. So I ordered a party of 5 from SweetGeogia, which is, they come in these cute little cases. It's 5 skeins of yarn that are in a gradient kind of together. And I chose exactly what was in the pattern photo because I loved the gradient here so much. So I think you can catch most of the colors. There's kind of a deep blue, there's a little bit of a turquoisey kind of green, there's some different color berry. It's like a deep berry, maybe a grape berry, and a little bit of a kind of strawberry pink kind of at the bottom there, or grapefruit pink. And this pattern is all about garter stitch, a few slip stitches thrown in strategically, and working with your colors. So you don't have to use a party of 5 gradient set, but it's kind of the easiest way to do this. If you have your own gradient sets at home and you want to try them out, Jen, the designer, provides a really great kind of yarn test in the pattern for that. She basically tells you like how to wrap your yarns next to each other to kind of see if the gradient will work out the way you expect it to. So if you want to try something other than a party of 5 set, you can, and you just use her yarn test to tell if it's going to produce this kind of gradient movement in the cowl. So I think you can see the little slip stitches that happen at intervals, and I'm actually holding it technically for you. I think I'm holding it upside down. Yeah, this is upside down. Let me get it the right way up so you can see the slip stitches going in the right direction. So there they are, going in the right direction. And you can see that basically you're swapping between, you have 2 different colors that you're working in the beginning. I think that it's trying to pick up on that camera. You can do it. 2 different colors that you're working in the beginning, and then you swap out one of them and you work a little bit longer, and you swap out the other one, you work a little bit longer. So you're basically creating this really cool gradient effect. Now, I said to you guys that it was a finished object, sort of, for a couple reasons. One is that it's finished, but it's not actually joined in cowl form, and that's because you do knit it in the flat, so that makes it even easier. So you knit this kind of large rectangle in the flat, and then you fold it together and join it, and it becomes a beautiful cowl. So the reason I haven't joined it yet, there are a couple. Number one, I was knitting this and I was thinking to myself, well, that's a mighty big cowl for me. I like my cowls a little bit tighter to my face because I'm always out walking the dogs in the wind and the snow, and I like to be able to just pull it up and like have it stay. So Jen's measurements in the end are for about 20, I think it's 28 centimeters around. So that's a little bit of a bigger, this is what it would look like just joined together. That's a little bit of a bigger cowl than what I would normally like to wear. So one option is to simply fold it over twice. And that's what I've been holding up for you. And that seems like a nicer kind of circumference for me. And it would mean that I'd be able to create a double thick layer in the front, which would be even more windproof. So that's one option. But the other option is, I have to say, I'm knitting this up and I'm thinking to myself, God, that would be a beautiful sweater, right? So let me show you what I mean. This could be the bottom of a gradient sweater. It was a cardigan that you join in the front. Right? Okay, my modification is getting the best of me on this one. So I kind of want to get another party of 5 set, and maybe 2. I think it would take 2 more. Yeah, 2 more. And knit, kind of go backward in gradient. So continue this gradient up, go back to the green and blue, up around the bust and the shoulders, and then knit some cute little sleeves and do some button bands. And once I thought of that idea, I just kind of couldn't let it go. So Jen, Star Hunter, this is a beautiful pattern and it will make a beautiful cowl, but I kind of want to make a sweater out of it. So we'll have to see what actually happens with it. But if you want to get in on this pattern, like I said, it's part of the SweetGeogia fall/holiday collection that's just come out recently, and their patterns are all up on the on Ravelry, of course. So if you look up Holidays with SweetGeogia Volume 5, you'll find this cowl, which is the Meraki Cowl. You'll also find a couple of beautiful shawls, a crochet shawl, and a hat, and another scarf in there. And I am very tempted to knit one of those shawls. I have the yarn for it, so maybe that'll be my next fun, kind of like, Jen calls it a popcorn knit. She calls this a popcorn knit, kind of something to knit in between other things that isn't too taxing on the brain. But I absolutely love this gradient, and I think, what do you guys think? Should I make it a sweater? I kind of think I should make it a sweater. Oh gosh, maybe I should. So that's my finished object for the week, aside from the cardigan that I'm working on for Albina, which I hope to be able to feature after the new year in the next cast for you guys. So that leads me to the second segment of this podcast, which is a little bit technical, and I've swapped out the mannequin, as you can see, so we can talk a little bit about button bands and collars and how to pick up stitches. Because if you're like me, you may have encountered in your knitting life patterns that say things like, pick up stitches evenly for button band. They don't tell you how many stitches, they don't tell you where, they don't tell you what you're looking for, like what are some of the things you got to worry about. And so I thought we'd spend a little bit of time right now talking about kind of my checklist for things to think about, especially if you're a beginning knitter or an intermediate knitter and you're not sure what it even means to pick up stitches evenly. What are some of the like things that could go wrong or things that you should be worried about or thinking about. So what I've put up here is the Lenten vest, which is a beautiful linen vest that I knit this summer by Moonstruck Knits. And so here we have both button bands and a kind of collar pickup that we can talk about. So I'm going to give you my list of things to think about for picking up stitches evenly. And I will also in the show notes include a couple of links to some videos that helped me when I was first learning about what it even means to pick up stitches evenly along a button band or a collar when you're not given stitch counts or any kind of other ideas of what you should be doing or looking for. One of the things to think about is that even if you are given stitch counts for a button band or a collar, you want to think about what that actually means. And I know when I first started knitting, I would get a number in my head, like the pattern would say, pick up 92 stitches. And I'd be like, oh my God, I've got to get exactly 92 stitches. Within reason. And so even if you're given stitch counts, just remember that you don't have to hit the stitch count exactly to make a good button band or a collar, but it gives you a kind of a basic kind of guesstimate of where you're going. Now, one thing that might matter is even or odd. So if someone says to pick up 92 stitches rather than 91, it pretty much means that you need to end with an even number, close to 90-ish stitches. You'll be fine, right? But if they give you an odd number, you want to get an odd number because usually that has to do with whether or not you're doing ribbing, which often requires an even number, not always, or you're doing some other stitch pattern that might require an odd number of stitches. So pay attention to the stitch counts if they're given to you, but use them as a kind of best guess. And if you pick up stitches from the bottom to the top or the top to the bottom, and you've got 94 instead of 92, don't pull it all out. It'll be okay. If you've got 90 instead of 92, it'll be okay. Just go with it. So that's one thing to think about because sometimes you are given stitch counts, but what does it mean to pick them up evenly? One thing to think about are regions of your sweater and think about basic division. So oftentimes if I have to pick up button band stitches and I know that, let's say I need 90 stitches on this button band, but that's what's recommended, then I will often divide the button band in half. So I might fold my knitting and put a marker here, and then I'll probably fold it one more time and put a marker here. So that I have, let's say, 4. So there's a marker here in the middle, marker at the top, marker in the middle, marker in the middle. So I've got different quadrants kind of like outlined. Then I know for 90 stitches in this half I need 45, and in this half I need 45. That's a good place to start. And then if I've divided it even further, maybe this is in 3 parts, I know I need 15, 15, and 15. And that way I can more evenly pick up those stitches. So one way to do this is to divide into quadrants. Use your safety pin locked stitch markers to be able to divide things up so that you can get roughly the right amount of stitches in roughly the right amount of area. Now, for more advanced knitters or for patterns in which there aren't stitch counts given, a couple things to think about. The main thing is that your rows in knitting are not equal to your stitches, if that makes any sense. So the row width of any one of these stitches is not equal to to a stitch because you're switching from going vertically to going horizontally here. So you got to think about the fact that stitches are elongated, which makes rows a different height than stitches themselves. So what all this means is you don't want to pick up one stitch for every row unless there's a real purpose for that. Then I'll show you that in a minute. But if you're going even, which means that you want this button band to lay flat on the body, most likely, you're going to want to pick up probably every 2 out of 3 stitches or every 3 out of 4 stitches. So if you look at this and you see there are 3 rows, or 4 out of every 4 rows, you're going to want to pick up 3 of those stitches all the way up. Because what that does is it allows the button band to sit flat and create the same width this way as you've got vertical space this way. So let me show you what happens if you pick up a stitch on every row, right? So if you pick up a stitch on every row, you might end up with something like this, which flares out and fans out. I don't know if you can see that fully. I think you can see it there. See how much it flares out? This one on the inside lays flat. This one, I picked up a stitch right along here, 1 stitch for every row, which ended up elongating the fabric to create this kind of cool effect, which is, it looks like a royal kind of coat. It kind of has these little wings on the bottom, or on the fronts. That's if you pick up stitches every row, instead of going every 2 out of 3 or every 3 out of 4. So if this is an effect that you're going for, and it's something that you want to see, this kind of elongation along your button band or your front collar or whatever it is, then that's how to do it. Pick one up, 1 stitch up for every row. Okay, but if we're talking about just picking up evenly, then you're mostly talking about creating this kind of effect, where it's going to sit pretty flat on your body. Okay, so we think about different regions. We think about how the difference between the rows and vertical knitting matches up to stitches and horizontal knitting. And we also want to think about troubleshooting. So if you were to pick up, let's say, a couple too many stitches along your button band, you'll probably be able to feel that as you're, maybe making your ribbing across, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. And you'll see that that just seems like it'll feel like too many stitches. So you could always purl 2 together or knit 2 together as a way to kind of reduce the number of stitches you've actually picked up. And I did that recently on the cardigan I'm test knitting. I picked up pretty much the right number of stitches, but I was over by, I don't know, maybe 6 stitches total. So I purled a couple together and it came out just fine. It lays nice and flat, and I was able to kind of use my intuition to shrink it up just a little bit. When you're thinking about collar stitches, there are a couple different regions in the collar that are important to think about. There's this region, which tends to be from the kind of neckline up to the shoulder. There's the top of the shoulder up here, and then there's the back neck stitches. Those are kind of 3 regions to think about. When you're picking up for this part of the collar from, around wherever the collar ends, so if it's your collarbone or if it's a v-neck, whatever it is, from this part of the collar up to the shoulder, keep in mind that you are doing very similar things to what you're doing with the button band. So you're picking up stitches over rows. So you want to pick up fewer stitches there. So again, that's like a 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, something like that in this region. Now once you get up to the top of the shoulders, you're still dealing with that vertical to horizontal shift, but it's a little bit less so there, so you can pick up a few more stitches. Around this back neck region, you're going stitch for stitch. So you can see where you're going with vertical knit stitches right into vertical knit stitches. So generally speaking, around the back neck of your sweater or your garment, you're going to pick up all of these stitches, which are often on waste yarn or they've been bound off in a very simple, kind of similar way. You're going to pick up all of those stitches. Right? Can you see the difference? So this is vertical into vertical, so you pick them all up, versus vertical into kind of horizontal, slanty knitting here for this upper part of the collar. So here you're doing that 2/3 or a 3 out of 4 kind of stitches. Other things to think about when you're doing button bands and collars are, besides the pickup, is the bind off. And I've played around with this over the last 5 or 6 years as I've been doing a lot of garments. And sometimes, as with my Alias sweater, which I knit maybe 5 years ago, it took me a couple tries to get the button band bound off in such a way that I was happy with it, because the first time I did it, I the directions just said bind off knitwise. So I'm a tight knitter, I bound off knitwise, and my button band basically curved like this, inward, because these stitches along this edge were tighter than the rest of it. So it pulled that band in, so it kind of sat funny on the body. So I took all that out. And if I were to bind off too loosely, it would flare the other direction. And that's not really a look you want to go for either. So to end up with this kind of flat, right, this flat look in the end, you have to find just the right tension and just the right bind off. And sometimes it's a combination of a stretchy bind off with a knit bind off, and sometimes it's some other bind off, sometimes it's a picot edge or something else. But you've got to find the right tension, and be aware that if the pattern says bind off firmly, their firm might not be your firm. So as with this sweater I made for Spencer, which was the Denali sweater, and it had a crew neck, and it was a doubled over crew neck. So you basically picked up your stitches, knit up double, turned it under, and then fastened it, tacked it down here. Well, the first time that I did that collar for his sweater and he tried to put it on, I mean, it was like a horror movie. He was like, I can't get it on, because by the time I had bound off and then tacked that down, it had tightened it up too much for him to be able to get his head through. So I had to undo the entire tacking and bind off, put in a stretchy bind off, and then tack it down kind of less tightly and with fewer stitches around the collar. And then he could put it on over his head, no problem. So if you're thinking on the one hand about where to and how many to pick up, you have to also be thinking about how to bind off and how that bind off is going to affect the wearer. Now around certain collars, like with this linen vest, you do need more of a firm bind off, because this sweater is going to hang differently. It's going to have more drape. So you're going to want something that's more firm around here. If you make it less firm, it will sag and stretch out. And that also happened to me when I when I knit a sweater for Spencer out of hemp. And that sweater, the collar wasn't stiff enough. And so over the years, the shoulders have kind of pulled it down and it's become stretched out. This sweater, as I've said in other podcasts, has this great kind of 3-needle bind off at the shoulder, and it has a firm bind off on the collar, and that is partially because the fact that it's 100% linen and it's going to stretch, and it needs those kind of strong points to kind of give it some stability and structure. So, for what it's worth, if you encounter a pattern that says pick up stitches evenly for the button band or the collar, those are my top tips of things to think about. Creating regions in your sweater, using your stitch markers to kind of like separate things out, and so you can count smaller numbers which are more manageable in your mind. Thinking about what to do with the bind off and how it's going to fit the wearer. Those are some things I've learned over the years that may be helpful to you, and I'm really curious about how the rest of you guys handle those moments and patterns where the designer says something like, pick up stitches evenly. What other tips and tricks do you have? Please share them in the comments here or over on the Ravelry thread. I'll start up a Ravelry thread about button bands and collars, and that should be fun for us. All right, segment number 3 is a little bit about our KAL, which is a Knits and Translation KAL, and it is coming to an end February 1st. There is still plenty of time to cast something on, whether it's a hat, mittens, even a sweater. If you have time in January to knit it, go for it. We've got some great entries over on the Ravelry thread for this knit along, and if you want to get involved, I would love to have you. All you have to do is pick a pattern that's written in a language other than your own. So if your first language isn't English, pick an English pattern. And if your first language is English, pick something other than an English pattern and see how you get along with it. See what you can learn, see what people you can meet to connect up with to help you translate it. And in our Ravelry group, we have a bunch of folks who have offered to help with certain languages. So it's a great opportunity to knit out of your comfort zone. And we have some prizes. Lorna Landcaster of the Cocoon Tree has donated a lot of bags for our giveaway, which I'll talk about in a little while. And one of those is going to go to the winner of the Knits and Translation KAL. So get in there. There'll be some other prizes too, and we'll end it February 1st. And all you have to do to have an entry in is get a photo up in the Ravelry thread by February 1st, and you'll be entered to win one of our awesome prizes. Yay! And I thought it might be fun today to mention a set of books that are in German that I came across when I was at the Jane Addams Bookshop, which is our local kind of indie used bookstore. And actually the owner of that shop is in our Ravelry group, so hey! I found some really great books there that I had never heard of before, and they're called the Bauerliches Stricken. I'm really not a German speaker, so I'm learning. So this is number 1, number 2, and number 3. And these are the 2 of the older editions, and this is actually one of the reprint editions for number 1. And I wanted to bring these to your attention because we've been doing this Knit in Translation KAL, and we've been talking about learning about patterns in other languages. And these books, which initially came out in the 1970s and 80s by Liesl Fanderl, were out of print for many years, and Schoolhouse Press reprinted them, and now you can find them on Amazon as a set. And they're usually this version of them, which isn't, they don't have the hardcover and they're not from 1979, but they're just as good. And these are basically German stitch dictionaries, folk kind of stitch dictionaries. And as I said, Meg Swanson of Schoolhouse Press was carrying them for a while. I don't think she's carrying them anymore, but I got my set. Like I said, there was a set of them at the Jane Addams Bookshop, so your independent bookseller might have them. You can also find them on eBay and on Amazon if you're interested in checking them out. Now, the first, according to the old Schoolhouse Press kind of blurb about them, the first one is about traditional knitting patterns from alpine regions. The second is more of like stockings and vests and clothing garments from museums and private collections that basically Liesl reverse engineered them so that you could see what the patterns were. And this third one is patterns that were from garments from townspeople in a number of different towns and monasteries, actually, where they had samples of garments and accessories, and she again reverse engineered them so that you'd have the stitch patterns. Now, one of the coolest things about these books, and what caught my eye when I first looked at them, is that even though they're in German, the patterns are charted, and they're charted in a different way than we would typically chart patterns nowadays. If you look at most patterns on Ravelry, they're not going to look like this. So check this out. It looks a little bit like X's and O's, but to my mind, I can actually read this chart a little bit easier than I could read other cable or lace charts, mostly because I can see it better. And I'd be curious to know if you guys get that sense too, like if you can see this any better than you can in more traditional, or less traditional, but more modern charts. And if you pick up a copy of these books, they often come with a little this isn't translation, but this is a translation from the symbols in the charts to what they mean in German for knitting purposes. And luckily for me, and for you guys too, my version of number 2 also includes this little English translation, and I'd be happy to share the English translation if anybody else needs it. This is the English translation for what the German stitches are. So once you have those 2 pieces of artillery in your arsenal, you can basically, if you have the little keys to the map, you can translate any of these patterns, any of these charts, and actually knit directly from them. So, and the other thing is number 2 actually contains a ton of extended charts in the back, if you get this version of it, the older version. So these are some of the charts that come in the back of the book. And like I said, I can just visualize them so much easier than I can kind of modern charts for cables and lace. So I'd be curious to know what you guys think about those representations of the charts. And I'm also curious if anybody has knit with or from these stitch dictionaries to create any kind of garments or socks or anything. One thing I have heard is that a lot of what's going on in here are twisted stitches, and like I said, I haven't translated all the German because the entire thing is in German, and none of these books have been translated into English yet. But the basis here, I think, for most of the stitches is a twisted stitch. So for what it's worth, if that helps you as you're trying to interpret what's going on, as it will help me, I just want to draw your attention to these because we're talking about knits in translation, and these are a really cool set of stitch dictionaries that I just kind of happened to happen upon as we were doing this knits in translation. And I think they're really interesting, and they give you a different perspective on charted knitting. So there you go. All right. We've made it to the end of the cast where the giveaway is happening, and this is a big, big old giveaway, so I'm pretty excited about it. And as you might have seen on the blog a few weekends ago, I featured the Cocoon Tree, which is Lorna Landcaster, and she is a woman in the UK who has been sewing for pretty much her entire life, since I think she was about 7. And her mom sewed, and her grandmother, and her sisters, so she has a world of experience in sewing. And I think it shows because her bags are incredible, and she sent along a whole range of her bags, and I believe this is the version that was at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, this fabric. Her bags are featured in the Ginger Twist Studio, which is a beautiful little yarn shop in Scotland that I visited when Spencer and I were there. And I think this is the pattern that she featured at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival as part of the Ginger Twist Studios kind of co-op there. And so she sent along an entire range of bags, and she has, I'll show you all the different sizes. So these are the smaller sizes. She has a large sweater bag. So these are 4 of her possible sizes that you can get on her Etsy shop. And these are traditional bags that a lot of people might have seen used for sweater. You know, they're the upright, they have a great base on them so that you can set them up and they'll sit there just fine. They're fully lined with this really cool contrast fabric, and all of her bags are lined with a different contrast fabric, which I think adds to the wonderful mystery of these bags. And the fabric itself is just, I can't even describe it. Like I've knit with a lot of project bags that are made out of just basic canvas. They're very practical. They have other features, and I've talked about some bag designers on here before. They have pockets, or they have different kinds of fabric, or they have drawstrings, or you know, whatever the feature is. But this fabric is just, there's something sturdy about it and very soft, and you can see I'm kind of squishing it. It's not just a canvas. It's got some real depth to it and some real kind of life to it. And I love that she has these little straps on here. So if you wanted to walk around and hold your knitting while you were wandering around, or while I'm standing at a soccer game, for example, you can do that. And they're just really incredibly well made. Like if you look at the zipper fastenings, you can see where she's hand stitched them, and you can just look at all of the beautiful stitching on the bags. It's just kind of incredible to see. So I love these bags. I think they're wonderful. And like I said, she's got a full range. So there are the 4 different sizes that I showed you, but then she also makes these pyramid bags, which are really cool. And they sit flat like this, and they have this opening in the front. So, and they're, again, fully lined, all really, really beautifully done. And if I had a flat surface, I could show you. I'm trying to get it, there we go. So it has this base, and you can set it up so that it will sit there, and you can just almost use it like a yarn bowl, like its contents would just come out the front. She has a couple sizes of those. And then the other thing she started making are felt yarn bowls, which look like this. And here's your little aperture to get your yarn out of. And you would put your yarn in there just like a good old yarn bowl, and it would sit nice and flat. It's got this great base. And this felt, I think, is 3mm thick. I mean, it's a nice thick felt. This is very sturdy and will last for a long time. So these are the Cocoon Tree felted yarn bowls. So yeah, Lorna sent a lot of bags, which means this is a massive giveaway. So what I'd like to do is have you guys leave a comment here on the Ravelry thread or over on the blog, and take a visit over to Lorna's shop, the Cocoon Tree on Etsy, and let us know which bags are your favorite, and maybe let us know which prize you'd like to win. Here are the options. Number 1, the yarn bowl, okay? Number 2 is one of these beautiful pyramid kind of triangular bags that has the opening on the front, all right? Number 3 is gonna be this little set of a kind of the medium-sized yarn bag and a little notions kit, which is perfect. I love the little notions kit. It's just, and it's fully lined and everything else is beautiful. And the last couple of prizes I'm going to save for the KAL. So there are going to be a couple other bags, like I said, for the Knit Along Knits in Translation KAL. There'll be a bag for that one. And for our year-long modification KAL, I've got another bag for that one. So yeah, lots of prizes here. Okay, so number 3, number 2 is the pyramid bag, number 3 is the little set, and number 1 is the beautiful felted yarn bowl. So that's 3 prizes. And like I said, leave a comment here on the blog, over on the Ravelry thread. Take a visit to her shop, to the Cocoon Tree. Let us know which bags are your favorite, and let me know which one you would want to win of these 3 possible prizes. A huge, huge thank you to Lorna for putting all the work into making these bags and sending them so that I could show you guys the range that she has and share them with you. I'm so excited to be able to send these out to you. This is a massive giveaway. So thank you, Lorna. This is wonderful, beautiful, and I love your work so much. So thank you for sharing it with me and with all of you guys out there in the yarn world. All right, I think that's it. If you are looking for forward to the new year like I am, I'm not a resolution person, but I am a to learn kind of person, so I will post my 2020 to learn list on the blog and maybe talk about it on the next episode. If you want to get into the act, I would love to know what your 2020 to learn lists are, things you want to conquer, things you want to make, things you want to do in the new year, and share them with us, and I'll open up a Ravelry thread for that one. Lots of good stuff on this cast. There's too much to even remember what was happening, but I had fun spending time with you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful, safe, happy New Year's celebration, and I will see you in 2020. Bye.